My father died while I was still in prison, and so there were a lot of questions I had, a lot of things that I wanted to better understand that I never got to ask him about, or I never got the answers. I remember hoping, because my dad had lived this kind of crazy storied life under multiple identities, some very criminal, some very kind of heroic, some very, just daily life. And I knew some of those people, or at least knew their names or their connections, and I was really hoping they would be able to shed light on that. First, when he died, I was literally wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs and shackles because I was being held in the hole at the prison, what we called the jail, because I had carried syrup outside of the chow hall. So taking anything that's allowed inside the kitchen, outside of the kitchen, is contraband. And syrup is especially problematic because you can make wine with it, you can make pies with it, you can make all kinds of stuff. So generally, if they find it, they're going to lock you up, whereas some things are just going to take. So they found it, they stuck me back in the hole, and I was kind of amazed. I figured they would just take it or maybe write me a charge, but literally put me in handcuffs and took me back to the hole. And that was when I found out that my dad was sick. He had expatriated and was living in Costa Rica, again, because his entire life was crazy and he did all these things. And he'd just fallen out one day. He was walking around, no shoes, no shirt, like he did all the time, and had just passed out. Somebody found him, and they had to have him airlifted to San Jose. Once he got there, because he was living hours away, I think like 6 hours away in this very rural community, they found out that he had a blood clot and he had lost a lot of oxygen to his brain. They managed to find the blood clot, then do whatever they did. And then they said, but the problem is you have a bad heart valve. Like, you're going to need to have that replaced. And if you don't, you're not going to make it very long. And everybody was really hopeful because the doctor said, look, other than this heart valve, you're in such good health, we want to give you a pig valve rather than a mechanical one because we don't think the mechanical one will last long enough for as long as you're going to live. And I knew something was going to go wrong. Everybody told me I was crazy. They said this is standard procedure. It happens all the time. But I just had this feeling in my heart that it wasn't going to go well. And I remember after the surgery, he woke up and he was fine. And somebody came, the psychologist came to my cell and actually told me, yeah, he woke up, he's fine. We just wanted to let you know. And I went to sleep. And that was the first time I'd been able to sleep in days because I just had that gnawing feeling in my stomach and in my chest that he wasn't going to be okay. As I'm laying there, all of a sudden the door pops open and they wake me up and they put me in handcuffs, which is totally not standard procedure. They were supposed to make me go walk to the door and do all this stuff. They marched me up the boulevard and they marched me into this one area that says no inmates beyond this point. And there's my mother. And I just asked, was it my dad? And she said, yeah. And somehow, again, I had just known. But I think the sadness around that, because I was kind of numb at the time, it really took me a long time to kind of tap into that sadness. Sadness was realizing that I didn't really know my dad. When he died, I started looking at the things in my mind and I started really seeing his clay feet or his kind of flaws, because he was extraordinary in a lot of ways and he was kind of horrible in a lot of ways. There were a lot of things he'd done and he was complex and he'd grown. And I think he was a much better person when I knew him or when he died than he was 5 years or 10 years or especially 20 or 30 years before. But I was really hoping that I'd be able to get some information from his past. So I remember reaching out to my sister's mom because my dad was married 4 times. And saying, hey, I'd like to better understand him. Can you tell me about your adventures? Because they went to El Salvador to be in the revolution together and they were both idealists. And she just didn't have any interest because she was living this normal life now. She had a very good job. She was remarried. She had another daughter. And I think she just didn't want to get back into that. And she's now passed. So I obviously can't get any more information from her. And one of his old running buddies, they had done all these crazy adventures, kind of like Hunter S. Thompson. And he wrote books about it. And so I was like, hey, maybe this guy will talk to me. He's very public about it. He doesn't have reason to put this in the past, but he never responded. And so I went through this list and I couldn't really get anybody to tell me those answers or tell me, kind of their story or what their perspective was. Because again, I had grown up mythologizing or just absolutely admiring my dad. So I didn't see the reality. I didn't see what was going on the ground. And I knew the low points and the high points. And he told me about, we got away with this, or, we managed to shut this down. Or, yeah, I remember when I found my buddy with a needle in his neck because he couldn't get to the veins in his arms anymore. And I had to be the one to find him. I had to be the one to then cover his body up. And so he definitely had these moments that he shared with me, but none of those are really the whole story. They're just snapshots. And I wanted more of the whole story. So having reached out to other people, one of the last things I thought about was I knew my father was a veteran. And it's kind of crazy because he talks about, he remembers some of his military service, does not remember going to college at all, but apparently went to college. My dad was doing a lot of drugs and he was doing a lot of, unhealthy things. And so there were entire periods of his life that he just didn't really remember. I'm sure he's had countless TBIs. I'm sure he just went through a lot of trauma too. So I figured I would look, and people told me it was going to take months or years. I wouldn't be able to get the records. And I don't actually know that much about military records, but what I managed to get was this discharge paperwork. And it only took about 2 weeks. I was really grateful that they reached out to me. The issue was I didn't have my father's social security number, so I didn't know how to look that up. And I was pretty sure it was under his born name, which is James Raphael Crossan. I was pretty sure it was under his born name, which was James Raphael Crossan, and not the later assumed identity of Philip Ortega, and not the later changed kind of reassumed identity of Philip Ortega, which I think is associated with his original social security card. So I had his name. I had where he was born because on my birth certificate, it actually says his name and where he was born. If I put that in, again, 2 weeks later, I got this paperwork. So it's either DD-214 or DD-215, which is attached. So I think the 215 is the second one. It says where he was born. It says his full name. I've got his service number. It says he started service February 1st, 1966. So he's right in the kind of Vietnam era time. He was an E2. He was in the Air Force. It says he was an Aero Med Spec. So I think he was a medic is what he told me. He went through Airman Basic Training or Airman Basic something. He did a Med Helper course. And he had an NDSM and an AFM 903, whatever those are. Again, I don't really have the details. I was kind of hoping to learn more about that. I know he had $10,000 in insurance for serviceman's insurance, whatever that means. He had 20 days of paid accrued leave that he didn't use. And I know he was a blood type O positive, which I think is the most rare. And I don't actually even know my own blood type, but it'd be interesting to see what that is. But they just went down all these things and then they modified and they said, oh no, he actually was at this place and his actual effective discharge date was October 26, 1967, where this said it was something previous. And this doesn't really give me a lot of information, but it reminds me that my dad had an entire chapter of his lives that I didn't really know about. Like, he never talked about the Air Force, except for to say, yeah, I was stealing drugs from the infirmary and selling them, but one of the people I was selling to was my commanding officer. So when I got caught, he managed to kind of finagle things. So I got an honorable discharge and got the paperwork right there. Because I remember before he moved to Costa Rica, when he was kind of getting his affairs in order, he found out that he was eligible for a serviceman's funeral, like a 21 gun salute and all the things. And my dad was so like purely revolutionary. Again, moving with his former wife to El Salvador to lead the revolution and change the world, to leaving the United States when we invaded Iraq, because he said he did not want to be part of an imperial country. He believed that so much, he up and moved to Costa Rica. So the idea that he would get a serviceman's funeral was kind of funny to anyone who knew him, because in some ways I think he was incredibly patriotic, because he always protected the First Amendment. He always believed in our right. He always believed in the democratic process, but he also just didn't believe in America. He didn't believe that our way of doing it was what he wanted or what he believed in. The idea of him being draped in the flag is probably not what any of us thought or any of us expected. And that isn't what happened. He had his funeral in Costa Rica and we had a giant memorial service here. But again, I wasn't able to go. One of the most heartbreaking things from prison, I remember after losing him and dealing with that numbness and not really being able to tap into the emotion, I remember thinking if I could go to the funeral or go to the memorial service, like that would allow me to tap in. But for a number of reasons, I was a high security level. It wasn't a funeral. It was a memorial service. The DOC wouldn't let me go. But there was a tape, a DVD recording, and I would have loved to have seen that because one of my good friends to this day sang his favorite song and everybody was quiet and just teared up. And I think things like that would have been really cathartic. They would have been really helpful for me to process what had happened and get through and really like feel it. And I remember my stepmother saying that she was going to wait until I came home to go with me and my sister, my half sister, to spread his ashes at this place called Canyon de Chelly in Arizona, which was like my dad's spiritual place. He'd grown up out there and it had very special meaning. Of course, that never happened. There really wasn't the opportunity. And in fact, the kind of catharsis or not even catharsis, the feeling came after being bottled up for so long when I got transferred from prison to prison. Because I went from Nottoway Correctional Center to Buckingham Correctional Center. And when you get transferred, they go through all your stuff. They check and make sure you don't have any contraband. They were going through my pictures, and Nottoway was kind of a messed up place. But one thing is they didn't really care about pictures. As long as it wasn't like a full-on nude or sexual activity, you could have it because they were like, hey, this isn't a problem. So most of the pictures were of my dad with no shirt and no shoes in Costa Rica because that's how he was living. He just went down there to live in a jungle paradise. And so the property person was taking every one of those pictures and putting them to the side. And I asked her, she said, oh yeah, you can't have any of these. And I told her, I was like, ma'am, I understand rules, but like, why? What is the problem? She said, oh, these are semi-nude. They're against policy. And I guess in a very strict reading of policy, that's true. But again, I said, hey, my father's dead. I'm not going to be able to get any more pictures. I've got a 32-year sentence. It's not like I can just go home and get these in a couple of years. Like, I would really like to be able to have these pictures. And she said, yeah, well, that's not my problem. You should have come to prison. And it was so bad. Like, she said some more things, but it was so bad that literally the other property officer was sliding a couple of them back into my stuff because he felt bad. He was like nodding me like, bro, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry she's being like this. But that was when it really hit me because it was this anger and this frustration, but it wasn't even at her. Like, I mean, there was some anger at her, but it was really at myself because it was that moment where I was fully coming to terms with the fact that I had put myself in prison and I had made it so I couldn't see my father. I couldn't see him alive in the free world. I couldn't go to his funeral. I couldn't even keep his picture. It was like this condemnation of myself, of everything that I'd done and all that it had cost the people around me because, yeah, I wanted to see him, but I think about how bad my father probably wanted to see me, how much he wanted to see me out in the world, how much he had cried, how much he had suffered because of the things that I'd done, and how much he beat himself up because he used to tell me, Jesse, this is my fault. Like, this is the sins of the father being visited on the son because despite everything I did, despite everything I never got caught for, I did a few months in jail. Like, I never did the time that you're doing, and I've done way worse. So he was carrying that. He was guilty. Now I'm angry. I feel like he's being stripped out of my life again, because the first time when he moved to Costa Rica, it felt like he was being stripped out of my life. He was down. He was gone. We could talk once every 3 months on the phone for 15 minutes, and that was it. Like, we didn't really have a relationship after that. And then he died, and he was stripped out of my life again. And then, these pictures were taken away. Like, the last things I had him were taken away. And it's this is 18 years. We're coming up on 18 years of when that happened. And it feels like a lifetime ago. And it is. It's an adult person's lifetime ago. But it's still something that I carry with me, and still something that I sometimes want to know. So when I was talking about service records, and I was talking about, I had a friend say that she got VA benefits and she was able to get in the USAA because her parents' service record and all these things. And I just thought that was like, hey, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can connect with my father in this indirect way. Maybe I can get USAA insurance, which I don't even know what the benefit would be. But it was just kind of this impulse to find something to connect with my father, because we've definitely connected around substance use, and we've definitely connected around, kind of getting in trouble and being in incarceration or being in institutions. But it'd be nice to connect with him around something else. But of course, he's gone. So I think, like a lot of people who've lost their parents, there's some part of me that's still seeking to connect, or still seeking to make my dad proud, or still seeking to figure out what it is that he wanted for me. Because in a lot of ways, I don't even know what I want for myself. I'm still kind of trying to sort myself out. Getting these records was interesting, and it was really nice that they came so quickly, because again, it gave me some hint. It gave me some peace. It gave me some symbolic, connection with my father. And I was glad to have that. And I think that I'll continue to seek that connection, and hopefully in healthier, more meaningful, or more reasonable ways. But I also am starting to realize that I have to parent myself in the ways that I didn't always get as a kid. Whether it was from him or from my mother, they did their best. They did their absolute best. And that also isn't always enough. So there are things that I needed or things that I wanted that I didn't get. And that's not anybody's fault. Like, well, no, I guess it is somebody's fault. But the things that I wanted and the things that I needed that I didn't get, I have to now give to myself. I can't expect somebody who is long dead, or I can't expect somebody who is just incapable to give me those things. And so I have to find a way to give them to myself, which means I have to nurture those parts of myself, and I have to nurture that kind of healing in myself. And that's a big part of what I'm doing. And I think that's a big part of what this was for, what it was a part of. That is my story about my father. And one day I'll figure out his secrets and how many things he got away with and how many adventures he had. But until then, I'm just grateful to have like one small piece of the puzzle.